Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rochelle Hood, and I have the pleasure of serving as SSON's Global Head of Customer Analytics and Research and the host for today's webinar session. We're going to be talking about thinking about the cognitive automation journey. Won't you join me along the way? Before I welcome our wonderful presenter, I'd like to go through just a couple of quick logistics to make sure that you can get the best out of the session possible. On your audience view screen, you're going to see three key boxes. The middle version will be the view of the slides. On the left-hand side, you're going to see a Q&A box. You're going to use this for two important reasons. First of all, if you have any questions, technical issues, information that you need about the webinar or anything about SSON or this tool as a whole, please write them in there, and Elisa, our webinar coordinator, will respond to you directly. Also, we want this session to be very interactive. We get the most out of this when you ask your questions so that we know that we're delivering good information that's relevant. So please, anytime throughout the entire presentation, type your questions into the Q&A box. Those will be queued up, and I'll have an opportunity to read them out to our presenter at the end of the presentation. In the event that we do not get to all of your questions today, and we hope that there's so many that might happen, we will take your information that's logged and then respond to them directly to you. Also, you're going to see appearing in the lower left-hand side of your screen something called the resource list, and that will include today's slide deck. We are aware of a technical situation that means that in the live view, for some of you, the formatting may be a little bit off and some of the words may overlap the images. If that's the case, we've provided the slide deck for you so that you can open that up and follow along and also reference it after the presentation. And then lastly, I just wanted to let you know that there's going to be so much great information in here. There's some really fabulous charts that you'll probably want to refer to your colleagues and teammates. So about 2 hours following this live session, you're going to get an email from On24 webinar platform with a link that you can then play the on-demand version at your leisure later on or share it with your colleagues. So with all of those quick logistics out of the way, let me go ahead and welcome to our digital stage Mark Davison. Mark is the global partner who is responsible for ISG's robotic process automation and cognitive services practice. He has accountability for all aspects of the business across research and advisory services. I know Mark is a very active speaker because he comes to many of the SSON events, bringing really relevant, very interesting client case studies and actually helping a lot with frameworks and laying out roadmaps for folks. He's one of the earliest practitioners in the RPA assessment and commercial automation of implementation. He began working with it more than 4 years ago, while also working in the business process outsourcing services. So a real veteran in the shared services and BPO environment. He is consulted across 3 continents and many different countries. You'll find him often actively on an airplane. Is probably the best place to find Mark. He's also a former CIO who has more than 35 years of experience in process automation, IT, sourcing, supply chain, transformation, and working a lot on acquisition integrations. He has worked for many different organizations and across different industries and sectors, including shared services, supply chain, and IT roles. He's also an entrepreneur, having founded 2 consulting practices himself, specifically in supply chain. So with that wealth of experience, along with holding an MBA and having a BA as well, he's certainly well qualified to talk to us about cognitive automation journey. And with that, Mark, I'd like to welcome you to the stage, and now over to you.
Thank you very much, Rochelle, and welcome everybody to the webinar. I have a lot of high expectations, I think, after that nice introduction, so thank you, Rochelle. And I was looking at the attendees, quite a few folks that I actually know or have met, some folks from our firm as well as others that I know I've been in touch with in the supplier community, and others I've met at conferences, and still others that are clients. So thank you all very much for joining. Today we have an interesting topic, and it's a topic that we get asked about a lot from both our clients and our prospective clients, which is all about cognitive technologies and what is cognitive, where is cognitive going, how do I get started, where can I use it, and many, many questions, more questions like that. So this morning, what we prepared and what you'll see here in this deck is some of the answers to those questions. Now, I know that on the live screen there's a technical glitch with the way some of these slides will be presented. So as Rochelle mentioned, there is a way to get a copy of the deck onto your own screen and uncover some of the words that might be covered up. My apologies in advance for that. With a last-minute glitch we just couldn't fix in the viewer. But let's get on to cognitive, and then we'll have time for plenty of questions as well. I think everybody knows this is an area of a lot of discussion, and let's start the journey. So this presentation is entitled Thinking About Cognitive. Won't you join me on the journey? And let's move on to slide 2. First is, the first point of this slide is, why does cognitive matter? And because frankly, I think we all know it's coming. You can't pick up a newspaper or look on the internet at internet news, or even watch TV in many cases without hearing something about cognitive or artificial intelligence. And there's no doubt that it's coming. I recently saw, in fact, just the other day on the news, a gentleman predicting that AI and cognitive will actually be bigger than the internet in terms of its reach and touch across people and processes, geographies, and so forth. And I frankly hadn't thought about it in those terms, but it does make kind of a sense to me, because just in what we're seeing today, everything from one of the most common examples is self-driving cars and the advances that are being made in that, and but also with the Internet of Things, all these devices that are attached, all the capability of devices to analyze trends and patterns in the data and take action is just being built into so many things today. We're just going to be overwhelmed by this technology, and I think there might be some validity in that prediction. Anyway, well, why does it matter? Well, you can see a few bullet points on this slide. So let me just talk about those for just a moment. First of all, and there's no question that it plays in the automation space. And as you can see, there is a differentiation here between plain robotic process automation, if you will, which in and of itself drives a lot of benefits, and cognitive. And the differentiator is really what I said a moment ago. The robotic process automation, that's pretty much automating repetitive, recurring, repeatable work tasks, and it's scripted. Yes, there is logic in it. We can do calculations. We can do if-then-else conditions and take decisions. But all of that is within the context of the scripted, repeatable action. Cognitive goes beyond that. The cognitive tools, particularly in the back office where we're working with clients most intently, has the capability to look at the data and analyze the trends and patterns, and then, as differentiated from robotic process automation, take a decision. So make a decision, take an action that otherwise would have been performed by a human. So that's the differentiator behind that first bullet point. On the cost front, we are seeing costs falling, and this is making it more economical for businesses. No longer are we in the days, the early days, which I guess would be 3, 4, or 5 years ago, when you saw a lot of this technology being used in research applications, companies spending tens of millions and even hundreds of millions of dollars on AI projects. In the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to see the affordability of this drop way down to the point where most of our clients and many, many businesses will be able to afford this technology. Something else that's interesting is, and I think, as I think about it, and Rochelle mentioned, I spent a good portion of my career, about half my career, in industry. So I'm aware of, I put on my industry hat, and I think, not as a consultant, but as somebody who's in business, I know my competitors are also looking at these technologies. And so in order to remain competitive, there is that aspect of this, to be looking at these technologies and thinking, how can I use them? And of course, there is the final bullet point, which is part of the value proposition. How do I get work done more efficiently, less costly, improve my speed to market or speed of response, and generate better results for my customers or my clients? This is all part of a general automation play. So let me stop there, and let's move on to the next slide, and let's dive into, what are the capabilities of cognitive. So I think, again, it's always good to level set. We do this all the time with our clients as well. Let's make sure we're talking about the same things. We tend to view the capabilities of cognitive in a couple of different buckets. And you can see here the top part is RPA just as the differentiator. But then if you think about cognitive and artificial intelligence, there is a slight nuance of a differentiation here. And this slide begins to call it out a little bit. With cognitive automation, typically we are talking about, in most cases, structured or semi-structured data. There is some unstructured data, but often it typically has to be structured so that the tools that are ingesting this data can act on it. Okay? And of course, we're talking about the heuristic processes and the idea of machine learning. Once we get into artificial intelligence, it's like a step up. There tends to be more unstructured data, if you will, more complex computational and logic, and it's getting beyond what you might typically see in a business, which is mostly where we're working. For example, we are not, an ISG, at least today, we're not building 3D robots that are, in factories, or maybe they're in human or animal form, and they're out there performing physical tasks. I recently was reading an article about robots that are being developed to help people with certain handicaps, for example. So you might have a robot dog or a small robot person, maybe like I hate to say an R2-D2, but something of that size and stature that can accompany an individual walking down the street who might be impaired either with some kind of physical impairment or might otherwise help them around the house. That's typically not where ISG is working yet, I might say. But that would be an example of where you might have some true AI applied, because you're always bumping into and you're ingesting data that's there's other dimensions in it, and it's very unstructured. In the business world, when we work in the shared services environment or the back office or finance and administration, we're typically dealing with data that's found in databases. It may not be structured. It often isn't clean. It's not perfect. It has to be cleansed and organized before it can be ingested into a cognitive application. But at least it's starting with some kind of structured input that can be used in the cognitive sense. So we're really talking about the middle bucket here and applications that we can use in a business, in the back office, but also in the front office. Call centers is another space where a lot of technology is being used like this. Great examples, by the way. Chatbots is one example of this, where cognitive technologies are being used to ingest structured data. Comes in many cases, it's textual in nature, it's character-based. I can read it, I can assimilate it, and I can respond to it. Let's go to the next page then, and we'll jump into what does the cognitive future look like. So this is a good discussion as well, trying to paint the picture for businesses of what might be out there. And it will impact the work. There's no question about it. So one thing we're sure is that while robotic process automation is freeing employees from repetitive and routine and recurring work, artificial intelligence and cognitive processes will free employees from what we think of as more heuristic or brainy, thoughtful work, right? And so more deterministic, which means they have to make a determination. And it'll be over time as these machines learn. They learn about the data, they learn about the processes, they learn about the decisions that are being made, and they get approval in many cases from humans to take those decisions. They will ultimately take over more of that work. And this will enable humans to be repurposed to other more thoughtful and higher value-added activities. We say that a lot in RPA, but it's true because if you think about it, yes, RPA is freeing up repetitive work, but cognitive, because it begins to creep into significantly the decision-making aspect of the work, it will free us up to work on these other aspects of the work that are not automated with some kind of cognitive technology. So if you think about it, what are we going to do? Well, obviously there's strategy, creativity, innovation, reasoning. There always will be work for humans. There always will be new situations encountered. There always will be some kind of tribal knowledge we often encounter, by the way, or data that's not clean. There always will be work for humans to do. Hard to think of everything being automated 100% everywhere. So that's where we need to figure out where humans will be working. And frankly, you can see it there. Innovation areas, working with customers on more strategic products and services, all areas where humans will begin to focus their activities as this technology takes root over time. So how can cognitive impact the business? Let's go on to the next slide then and talk about that for just a minute. Because now that we've covered what it is and where the impact will be, let's talk about some of the different technologies that are out there. And again, we always start with RPA because it's kind of a baseline against which to measure some of the cognitive But here's the slide number 5 that presents a view of some different technologies that are out there. So some of you might be familiar with OCR, optical character recognition. There is a new or next generation of it. We call it intelligent character recognition, ICR. How does it differentiate itself? Well, for example, if you've got a typical installation of an OCR product, you might be using it maybe to read invoices or read orders from customers and from suppliers. So how does it work? Typically, you have to set up a template so that OCR software can recognize the source of it and it can read the data. It'll identify the data it doesn't recognize and put that out to a queue for humans to fix. How does ICR work? Well, there's some options, there's some variations on the theme here. One variation is template-free scanning. So instead of setting up a template for each unique document to read, the software just operates without it. And it could, because it can recognize things like dates. It knows what a date looks like in a date format. It can recognize streets and states and addresses and identify that, or zip codes, and identify that as an address string. Then it can store that information relative to that particular customer or supplier. And the next time something comes in from that supplier, it recalls that information so it can act even faster. So this is one good example of where cognitive is being applied. It's relieving humans in many cases of setting up templates, which, again, if you have OCR, you know it's very time-consuming to set them up and maintain them. But also, it's using the data to come back again and again, analyzing trends and patterns and using that knowledge, learning from the experience to help speed along the process. There's also you can see over here some other variations of natural language processing. So this is, of course, reading natural language, either ingesting it as text or listening to it in a voice format and converting it to digital and then acting on it. And you know, the technologies in this space have really come along. I know we've worked with a partner ourselves who has software that can read unstructured data from emails and other documents and structure it. And the application in this case was forwarding it into a service desk for action. So emails come in from users, or chats come in, and messages come in, gets structured and gets routed to that person, or maybe gets resolved automatically. But there's other forms of this as well. There are products in the market that are beginning to accurately intake voice from customers, or voice, period, digitize that and act on it as well. So this is going to be a huge area. When you think about the application for this, think of all the people that maybe don't have access to keyboards, or they're not keyboard trained, they're not good at keying. So there's a whole population out there where natural language processing has a huge opportunity. And then, of course, what happens is that we get intelligent automated virtual workers. So this might be in a call center or a customer service area, where actually you have a robot that's so empowered with these various technologies, it literally is just working constantly, and there's almost no human interaction. And ultimately, we've joined up with the cognitive and AI technologies to automate as much of a role as we can. So as you see down at the bottom, some of the description, we're going from RPA on the left, which is mimicking human action, and no machine learning, frankly, all the way over to the right, where we're using various technologies, and ultimately we have, if you will, a cognitive agent who's performing the work. So thinking about that, let's go to the next slide, and this actually is one that resonates a lot with clients and prospective clients today, because everybody's trying to figure out, well, where does cognitive play? And this slide is a really good visual, I think, of how cognitive can potentially interact with RPA. So let's walk from the bottom up. The light blue part of it represents the use of and growth of robotic process automation over time in an environment. And the dark blue above it represents potentially the expanding use of cognitive technology. And so if you think about it, with RPA, really no process gets automated 100%. There's always some kind of issue or exception or escalation that has to happen. And that's what those little arrows are that are pointing up out of the light blue portion into the dark blue. This is exactly where you might find a cognitive application. So, for example, you might think about AP invoice processing. where invoice exception processing, where there's lots of business rules when invoices error out of a two-way or a three-way match, trying to match PO, and if it's a three-way, a receiver to an invoice. And there are many variations on this. There could be lead time exceptions. There could be vendor name misspelled. They're not the same. SKUs aren't quite right. Unit pricing isn't right. Descriptions aren't right. City, state, zip's not right. There's a million reasons why an invoice might not be processed automatically. And so how do those errors get resolved? Humans intervene and they follow the business rules. But it's also impossible to script every single exception. It would take forever. So this is where a machine learning example might come in. And so the classic example is an invoice comes in and it's got something on it. Let's just say it's an SKU that hasn't been used in a year. Okay, and maybe it's even archived. So what has to happen is this exception gets escalated to a human, and somebody says, oh, yeah, I remember that came in last year. Let me look that up. That was just around the holidays. So the human looks up and says, sure enough, it shouldn't have been used as SKU in their system. It should have been taken out 3 years ago. Let me now fix that. Well, this is where cognitive technology, scanning the data, okay, analyzing trends and patterns of previously processed invoices, for example, could pick that up and apply that rule in an invoice exception processing environment. So this is a great example, by the way, of where an exception that otherwise would go to a human might be processed by a cognitive application. And then you can see at the top, just one last piece on this slide, this thought, is that there's still exceptions from the cognitive. There will still be things that the cognitive technology will struggle to address, or maybe the cognitive will come back with a decision and a recommendation, and that's be approved by humans first. So there still is a role for humans in this model. So that gives you a flavor of how potentially RPA and cognitive intersect in a business. Fortunately, we have some very good experience with that. We've seen a lot of it, and I'm glad to answer any other questions that might come up. Moving along to the next slide, there's always a technology question that comes up. And so this actually is another one of my personal favorite slides, and it happens to show a little bit about the technology architecture of a business and where cognitive technology might play. And the way to explain this slide is, at the bottom of a business's technology architecture rests on a solid foundation of infrastructure. And basically, it's commodity, largely commodity. No negatives for anybody who works in infrastructure, no insult intended. But basically, the prices have come down. Servers notwithstanding, some unique capabilities that might be proprietary, across all kinds of hardware and equipment, pretty much interchangeable. Sitting on top of that, a company's business application. Most of our clients have some kind of ERP system, or systems, but they also have custom apps. We know about custom apps for pricing, inventory management, or collection. And then above that, some BI software. And then on top of that, the RPA software that's interacting with these applications. So sitting on top of that will be your cognitive and AI. And why would it be on top? Well, what's going to happen is these cognitive and RPA applications also are going to throw off some very interesting statistics about what's happening in the business. When processes start, when they complete, how long they take, who's involved, the nature of the escalations. And so the ability of a business to capture that information and use that knowledge to guide the business either strategically or tactically to improve, to become more efficient, to go to new markets, develop new products, to solve problems, to go after new customers. That's why it sits at the top of the triangle. It really does crown, if you will, in today's day and age, the technology architecture of business, because it can yield, first of all, it can perform tremendous work itself, but it can also yield tremendous insight. So, of course, since we're talking about IT, let's talk about the IT impact for just a moment, because there is an IT impact. I've been fortunate, as Rochelle mentioned, part of my background is in IT. I came up partly through IT and in my career and rose up to the position of CIO in several organizations. Great experience, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and learned a lot. And I always look back on when I'm working with clients and others, although I spend a lot of time in the non-IT parts of businesses. I look back on my IT days very warmly and fondly, and a lot of lessons learned. And so IT has a very important role to play here. No question, IT is the keeper of the technology in many cases, and we want this software to run within IT's environment. We want the software on servers that are substantial, they're hardened, they're consistent, they run reliably. We want the software and the automation, the automated processes backed up, and we want to have high availability. Very important because these automated processes are taking over the work of humans, and ultimately, as I think probably most folks on the call know, and I know, we won't be able to withstand significant outages. The work of the business will come to a grinding halt. So with that in mind, IT has a very, very important role to play. I have some white papers out on our website that talk about this, but specifically, what's the impact? What does IT need to know when you think about what does it take to install this and support it? So you can see a few things are different here for cognitive versus RPA. First of all, bandwidth, infrastructure utilization. There is potentially greater utilization here as the bots take over more and more work. But there's a storage impact. And it's interesting. There is a data preparation and data management work stream in this. It's very important. I know for those of you who are with companies and not vendors or consultants in business, you know, and the rest of us also know that the data is not always clean. Vendor master data is not clean. Item masters are not clean. Customer masters are not clean. Okay, and so an important part of maybe one of the most important things to take away from today is that, you know, the extent to which the data is clean will impact the ability of these programs to render good, accurate, and reliable decisions. So there is a work stream in all this to first get the data clean, if you will. And the data doesn't have to be huge. It depends on the application and on the process. We hear talk all the time about, you know, data lakes and data oceans, data ponds, data puddles. There's different sizes of data, I guess, water containers. But the key here is to have the right size data for the automated process and then have good, clean data. And so as that is clean, that's going to spawn some new data sets. I'll use an old term, data sets from my old days. They have to be stored somewhere, and they'll grow over time as the machine learning takes over. So that is something to keep in your hip pocket. Applications, again, you know, largely agnostic, but there could be some integration required. The AI, the cognitive tools, rather, depending on the nature of the tool itself and how it works with the applications and the data that it needs, it could be a more technical interface than traditional robotic process automation, which typically is GUI driven. And then there are security and audit concerns that our good friends in IT have. And fortunately, by the time most of us start working with IT on some kind of cognitive pilot or proof of concept, it's not like IT lives in a house with no doors and windows. They're familiar with what's happening out there as well. So they'll come with all these questions, and I can speak at least for the partners that we work with, the vendor partners that we work with. Almost all of these tools, really all of them, they're in enterprise clients that are global in nature. They face questions time and again about controls and security, auditability, as is mentioned here, and they can all come forward and respond to the requirements of IT, internal auditors, external auditors, those kinds of things. But it is important to think about that as you embark on your journey and have these questions lined up for your partner or your consultant, so that when you do come in front of your IT brothers and sisters, you're prepared to answer the questions, and also for third parties and others that might exert influence over making a decision about not just the vendor, but the automations that are built. So let me move on then to the next slide. It's all good discussion, and talk about some of the challenges of the journey. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting, I think. And this is where I think as consultants, we can really add value to our clients. I know from talking to clients, as Rochelle mentioned all the time, you know, the questions that come up, I can't say I know all the questions, but I know a lot of the questions. Where do I start? Who do I talk to? You know, how do I get this going? How do I know if it's even viable? Who can help me look at the vendors and the products on the market and make an informed choice and so forth. So I think the first thing I always tell smart clients, and I was the same way when I was in business and I was the client, is just recognizing limitations of the knowledge, experience, and expertise inside a business. Many businesses know their business well. They know their markets well. They know their products well. They have deep knowledge about the nuances and unique and critical aspects of running the business. But this is an area that's fast evolving. Few people, if any, are able to keep up with it day to day. At ISG, the research side of our house keeps up with it pretty closely in the robotic and cognitive practice. We follow a lot of vendors and try to stay on top of what's happening out there. So we try to be able to answer these questions. And so the first step for me is always thinking about, well, who can help me? And the second thing is then, well, where do I need help, right? So a couple of thoughts on this page. Where can I apply a cognitive technology? What processes are suitable? There's lots of examples in the business, right? The question is figuring out which ones will generate an ROI. Some businesses want this to be self-funding. How can I go after something initially that, for example, will generate a nice return and then help me fund the rest of it? Others want to pilot and dabble in a little bit, dip their toes in the water, see if it really works. All these are good places to get started. We talked about the data. That's the next point. So this data thing, there's the head on this, the data work stream here, as you can see, figuring out if it's suitable, if I can use it, what needs to be done to make it right. I think something else is the strategy and the vision. We do a lot of work with clients and helping them establish and set up their centers of excellence. And we always try to ask the client, well, what's the strategy for automation in business? Well, what's your vision? What's your mission statement? What are we trying to achieve? Let's frame it up a little bit. And again, why do we do that? Because we're trying to help the business make sure that we generate the right returns. And so I think it's important to think about the strategy, and also in light of what else is happening in the business and externally, to make sure that the investment in the initiative will generate the return. Technology solutions, we did talk about IT a little bit. There's lots of technology solutions. This makes me think of on-premise or off-site or in the cloud, if you will. There's lots of different technology arrangements. There's also different types of programs. There's everything from you build it, you write it, you build it, to what can I buy that's pre-built, maybe, and bring it in and attach it to my environment. So there are different types of technology solutions that are out there. Communications and organizational change management is the next point. It's an opportunity for me to plug a little bit my brethren on the OCM side of our practice, but in all seriousness, this is a serious topic. These are significant automation and technology changes that do impact people's jobs. They do impact the business. So there's an important work stream here about how do I communicate and manage expectations throughout the business and amongst the employees, and to some extent throughout the ecosystem, suppliers and customers and other third parties that I do business with, to make sure I manage those expectations. How do I understand what the changes are to the way the business operates, my organization, before and after these automations are deployed, and what's my transition plan, thinking through all of that. I know in RPA, a lot of times the automated processes roll out in rapid fire. So at least with ISG, we've taken a version of our standard OCM approach and customized it to RPA a little bit to address some of the shorter time frames. With cognitive, it can be both shorter and longer. It all depends. Or it could be evolving. And so there's still a need to work closely with others in the business, knowing what the processes are, who the people are that are impacted, the processes that are impacted, and use those best practices to make sure that the business doesn't get tripped up, people don't make bad or poor decisions and so forth. What about best practices? So there definitely are best practices for implementing these automated processes. It's not unlike RPA. Vendors, as you'll find, will come with different approaches, perhaps, or different methodologies, I should say, to building it out. But generally speaking, what we typically see is some kind of a proof of concept or a pilot up front to make sure that there's a business case, make sure the technology works, make sure that the process will work in some kind of a cognitive fashion. And then a build out from there and a growth from there of the installation of the technology, the application of the technology. And then there's best practice in that. I already talked about one with the data. They're best practices for building these automations, if you will, for constructing them, for measuring them, measuring outputs, making sure the returns are there. All of that should be brought to bear. And then, of course, the human resources and organizational entities. So there is a slightly different skill set that can be required to make cognitive work. I'm sure many of you have heard of the rise of the data scientist, and there's all kinds of different terms for this. But there's a lot of science around this. There's a science to preparing the data and building the automation so they work with the data to render the right decisions. There's a science around reviewing the results and analyzing the results, getting the analytics, and feeding those back into the starting point as well as in the business to generate continuous improvement. So there is a new type of skill that can be very helpful here. There's other technical skills as well. As usual, when integrating technology or bringing new technology in, and there could also be other business leadership skills. For example, if your business already has an RPA Center of Excellence, and now the mission is to embrace some kind of cognitive, approach or embrace cognitive approaches. Do I need to educate my staff? Do I need to look for somebody who's got experience who can be my cognitive lightning rod or leader? All those questions come into play for success. And of course, governance, the last bullet point. So as is the case with new technologies in many cases, the business will come up with ideas for automation. So how do I intake those? How do I evaluate them? How do I select them, prioritize them? And over the whole initiative, how do I organize? Do I have a steering committee, which is kind of a traditional organization? Where does it sit in the business? Also, how do I manage issues and risks to make sure that as I identify any of those initiatives, they get escalated to that point where they can be addressed. So this is a great list, by the way, of some of the challenges that need to be addressed. Okay, let me move on to culture. So this is an interesting point and worth spending just a minute or two on. So how much does the culture of a business impact the ability of a business to be successful in cognitive implementation? I'll leave that question hang out there for a minute because some of these questions here are very important. They may be perhaps insightful to those on the phone or on the conference call or the WebEx about thinking in terms of their own organization. The first question is the one that often comes. How open is the business to new technologies and new things? That's something that you'll need to answer if you're pursuing this, as are the rest of these questions. The organizational bias. Are we the kind of organization that tends to act quickly? Do we have a bias fraction? Or are we more conservative? Are we thoughtful? Are we attentive? Do we have a lot of reviews and like that? What about the experience of complexity and moving goals? This is often a challenge for large, complex organizations. If you're in a big business and it's very bureaucratic, bureaucracies tend to resist fast action. Right? Things get complex. There's often layered decision-making, and it can be difficult to meet goals and targets and deadlines. So it's just something to think about in terms of signing up for a cognitive implementation that might involve a good portion of a larger company. What about stakeholders? Who's involved? What is the process of resolving issues? How about communications? And the rest of these, are important parts of this initiative, as well as many others. What does it take to scale up? So, the investment in this technology, typically it is an investment. It has payback, of course. But once you've made the investment, how does the business scale up? What are the right processes and functional areas? And what's the route? What's the process? What's the roadmap for that? So culture will impact this. I would add one more thing to this, which is I didn't see it on here, but teaming. Some organizations are very, very good at quickly organizing and teaming up and getting things done. Others really struggle with it. And as with any new technology that's brought into a business, there are going to be hurdles. There are going to be technology hurdles to get it installed. There are going to be hurdles to get the automation built. There's going to be hurdles testing and implementing it to make sure they do render the right outcomes that yield the desired results in the business. So think about the culture of making those things happen, the level of difficulty, the ease with which a company can get this work done. It's all good food for thought. I don't have the answers on this call. My job is to call them out on this call and for you guys to think of them. But that's a good slide, good food for thought. Something else, I'll just move to the next slide. Something else that is worth talking is when you're in the heart of this, how do these things get built? So, it's fine to run a proof of concept, and it's fine to, kind of do a laptop-based thing, but ultimately we want this to be a part of the fabric of the business. We want it to be part of the way we do business. So we have to think about what's the most important way to do this. And in our approach at ISG, as I know many firms, we try to leverage agile approaches. So it's very interactive. It can be quick. We can see results quickly, if you will, through various waves or sprints of work. And we really advocate this very much to our clients. And these are some bullet points that just talk about some of the benefits of using the agile approach. I would also add this, that there is room on the fringes of this for some more traditional, approaches. And so one area is around requirements. This is defining requirements around a process well. Defining the process requirements is often a place where if that is not done well, everything else that follows from that will be handy, will be compromised. So I can't say enough to focus on that. I know internally we focus on it. Defining requirements for this type of automation is not unlike we've had for many years. It's challenging to come up with complete, accurate, and thorough requirements at the right level of detail. So that is worth calling out. That, of course, if done well, will lead to great sprints later on. And on the back end, something to call out surrounding the other side of agile work around the configuration or build out of these automated processes is the testing process. So, in RPA, excuse me, we're largely testing for a known outcome. We do various levels of testing with robotic processes, and we generally know what the outcome will be, so we can test against that. We put them into production, and we pilot them, piloting them against the real live work, and again, in most cases, the outcome is known. With cognitive, it's a little bit different. Really think about this. What is the right way to test these cognitive processes in let's say, in a user acceptance test environment, or even in a pilot? How am I going to test this? What are my test scenarios? What are the results I'm trying to achieve? How do I make sure they're right? How do I put the right checks and balances in? So that's on the back end. And sandwiched in the middle, of course, is an efficient process to build the automated process, and that's where Agile. We can answer questions about that later, but probably enough said about that. I find in most businesses that we talk to, most companies have experience with using Agile approaches. Sometimes it's on the operations side, not just in IT. But for technology, for sure, more and more companies have experience with Agile and or want us to use Agile. They work with them. So what's next? Just before we wrap up here, some food for thought, and then, Rochelle, we can open up for questions. What's next? How do I get started? Well, that's what this slide's a little bit about. I've peppered throughout this talk this morning some ideas about how you do get started, but I think there are some valid ways to do this. And one is, find the right opportunity area. For sure, we encourage clients to do some kind of proof of concept. There's a learning phase to this. This is not like other automations that have been put into the business. It's important for the business to learn about the technology, how it works, how these processes are automated, what's a good process for automation, as well as IT. I don't want to leave IT out because IT needs to be watching the software as well. I think it's right. It's important to find the right opportunity, and then also, what's the right team? What are the right resources? That's the second bullet point. And then I think find the right partners. There's lots of partners all over the place at ISG. There's some great experience, and we have lots of competitors who also have good experience. You've got to find the right partner that's the right fit for you. Do they have the right knowledge and experience and expertise in this area? Can they clearly communicate a message? And then the last part for me is, are they the right fit? Are they the right cultural kind of communication style that you can partner up with somebody and see them as your long-term partner to drive the solution into place and create success. Some of these other items here are part and parcel with any good initiative. Governance, of course, planning. So there are lots of unknowns on the journey of the customer. But it's still possible to plan. It's possible to have a plan. You have the right partner who's been down this road. They can help you with the gotchas and the lessons learned. That can help you in some cases, or hopefully in most cases, avoid pitfalls that others may have encountered on their own journey. Then there's best practices, and they're all over the place. And once you've got that together, then, think about what data do I need? And what can I do a pilot on, get the pilot in place, measure and monitor the results, and, of course, fine-tune and expand, which is just 2 code words to scale up. In bringing this, our session to a close today, just the final slide with some food for thought, some lessons learned and words of wisdom from our own experience. And I'll go through the slide and then I'll turn it back to Michelle for some questions. But this is a good slide, when we work with clients, and at least the others working with clients as well, some of these things really resonate. So, for example, solve big problems. How do you get the payback? Well, you're looking for areas of the business that are painful. Sometimes they are costly. Other times there's delays. Other times, we're struggling to go make a decision that we just don't have the data for, we don't have the experience for. We're looking for solving big problems. Sometimes it's with a large customer. It could be order processing or solving order problems. It could be with customer service. All these areas are great to look at to solve the big problems that maybe prevent a customer, us being successful with a customer, or getting those customers' orders fulfilled. Trust but verify. This is just, I think, goes without saying, particularly in anything with software. You want to trust, but you need to verify to make sure that whatever investments are being made, for example, are generating the results. Documenting assumptions. I'll just give a few words about each one of these just quickly. There's going to be a lot of assumptions that are going to be made as we go down the road on this. And I'm a little maniacal with our own stuff about documenting assumptions, because a lot of times the assumptions can be mapped to risk. Okay, so if we can understand the assumptions we've made, in many cases we can head off risk, which is where I like to be. No science projects. Of course, there are science projects, but the ones that we want to be careful of are those that really don't render any benefit. I'm just switching around. No fear. Don't be fearful. There are going to be problems. There are going to be challenges. And on the bottom, you can see there's a circle that says fail fast. If you're going to fail fast. Live and learn, and then use that knowledge to scale and become successful. And think big. And let's grab a guide. We talked about this earlier, trying to find the right partner in this and continue the journey. And so just some lessons learned. I will just give you a market perspective before we wrap up here, which is that while there are lots of different cognitive technologies, for example, we see a lot in IT. There's a lot of IT tools that use autonomic technology, which are cognitive, which are great, by the way, and very helpful in IT. There are other companies that are more and more putting in intelligent character recognition or chatbots because they're easy. In some cases, they're easy and quick to put in, and other technologies. The real challenge of this, the real, I guess I'm searching for the right word, the real target where businesses will really benefit from this, we believe, is in the back office, is in shared services. It's where we have a lot of people that in day-to-day transaction processing are making decisions. So how can machines learn to do those jobs? Get that knowledge and actually take those decisions. That's really a huge opportunity for businesses, and that's where, frankly, most businesses are looking, they're dabbling. Nobody's really, really deep into it. There are lots of pilots going on, and there are lots of discussions about it. But as we work with clients in the space, and this is, by the way, where a lot of clients want to go, they're just beginning to circle up the wagons, learn about it, think about how do I make this work, and what do I make this better. So, Rochelle, I've come to the end of the slides. I think we should open it for questions, and I guess I'll turn it back to you.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much, and thanks for those pearls of wisdom. We do have more than a screen of questions, so we'll get through as many as we can. First one was when decision-making can change each day. So, for example, for order fulfillment or the need to prioritize customer A today and customer B tomorrow, how can you automate that? Wouldn't the effort to communicate or teach the tool how to handle each unique system take more time than just doing it with a human directly? Specifically, where there is time pressure, how do you use cognitive in these situations?
It's a great question, and actually it's a great target area for cognitive. There are ways to do it. I'm going to jump to the latter part of the question and I'm going to duck the first part for just a moment, which is that, let me ask Rochelle, are these questions on my, can I see these questions, or are they coming into you via email?
You can see that one. So if you go down to the bottom of the navigation bar and hit the Q&A button, you'll actually see that in the folder from Alejandra.
Okay. Very good. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my folder. Yes. Okay, now I see it. Okay, so, a couple of thoughts on this question. The first is that, just in the latter part, we hear this a lot. It's much easier just to do this than to teach a machine how to do it. And in fact, we actually hear it a lot. And so my answer always is, well, if we teach the machine how to do it, we teach it once. And then the machine can repeat that action over and over again. So this is all part of the planning effort. It's how we plan the initiative and we plan the time to make the investment in training the tool. But the first part of your question actually, I think, goes to, I call it the 80-20 rule. So we see this in RPA, and we also see it as we think about cognitive application. Usually there's some kind of 80-20 rule or 90-10 rule. There are some inquiries or exceptions or escalations or actions that are always more frequent than others. And so our thought always is, let's look at that as a place to start. What commonalities are there? Is there a core process here with variants or different use cases? Try to look at how to skin that cat and create groupings, if you will, of the exceptions. And then analyze them in a business sense as to, well, if we start with one, what could be the return? How would we attack that? And how would we get that up and running to start? To make our investment worthwhile, to have something meaningful in terms of automating process. And then, as was pointed out by the question, how do I get the machine learning going and make the investment so it pays back? So I think that's the way to think about that. I don't have any concrete recommendations for you without knowing more about the process, but that's the way I would at least think about it. Michelle?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the next question is, it would be great to know the metrics of success for cognitive products. Intent to hit or miss connecting to the correct BPN. I'm not sure what that abbreviation is meant to be, or few, but is there any agnostic approach for metrics and value creation? So what would you see with some of your client base in terms of some of the metrics they're using on the value that cognitive products are delivering?
Right, good question. So first thing I'll say is that in any effort, the metrics are very important. There's an old saying that I learned a long time ago from a client, which was, what gets measured gets done. And so having the right measurements to drive the right results is very important. And there are some. For example, the way we work with clients is we like to start with the business case so we can understand up front what are all the costs involved in an effort and then what are the benefits. So that business case will usually be across a certain time frame, yield a certain return on investment, and then specifically maybe savings or benefits by quarter across the timeline. So initially, we believe there should be some financial metrics. That's one part of it. But there are other metrics as well. Some companies also measure improvements in productivity, for example. So if we process a certain number of orders, just going to the last question, in a certain time frame, can we see over time a marked increase in that? Or maybe it's exceptions or escalations to a human that are going down. Or maybe it's against an SLA. So he's taking 10 days to respond to something, then it takes me 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, and so forth, for example. There could also be compliance requirements. So, in various plants we have, there are process compliance and other requirements to comply with. It could be legal or regulatory, or maybe they're just organizationally imposed. But there could be a measurement of before and after with regard to the number of exceptions or issues that are raised. And that's one part of it. Now, when we're talking about value creation, that's a little bit different. So what's the definition of value? And I like this a lot, by the way. How do we create value? So it could be maybe that customer satisfaction increases, and it's tied directly to better responsiveness in the call center. It could be that I'm using X number of automated processes instead of X number of people, and I've reduced my human costs, yet I'm doing more. So how do I measure that value? There's different ways of creating it, and value is a great question and would need to be defined. But there's some good examples, Rochelle, of some of the metrics around it, and hopefully that helps.
Certainly, and it's great that you led into talking about contact centers, because our next question is, can you share some more examples about how cognitive is used in a contact center environment, specifically in contact center front office?
We can. So I had mentioned about chatbots already. Chatbots, I would say, if I went back a year, nobody was talking about chatbots. Now everybody's talking about chatbots, it seems like. So that's something definitely to look into. I do think that there's a huge opportunity there, but it's important to recognize that not everybody that's in contact with a contact center is on their mobile device or their laptop. Some people are still calling in by phone. So I would encourage you to think about the different ways people contact the contact center, and then think broadly about that. So if I'm on my mobile device or I'm on my laptop, I can message, I can chat, I can email back and forth. That's very textual. I mean, a lot of this, by the way, has been in place for many years. That's not new. But behind it is the new thing. So what I want to have on the back end is I want to have the ability to have some kind of software that can take unstructured data and structure it so I can act on it with my cognitive platform. And that could be intake via email, or intake via chat, or intake via instant message. And then I want to have those automations, those cognitive automations behind the scenes that are responding. But there's other ways to contact the contact center as well. We talked a little while ago about phone calls and voice calls. So how can I normalize a voice, okay, to the point where I can understand it sufficiently to convert it to digital so I can feed it into that same cognitive engine? That's food for thought. And there are solutions out there that provide some of this. Admittedly, there can be challenges when people call into the phone with the quality of the voice. But that technology is improving significantly, so that's another way to do it. The last thing is, of course, we talked about it, which is people who maybe are communicating with us via fax. So it's not even, or other ways, the mail maybe, it's not even coming in digitized. So how do we digitize it? And frankly, there's a lot of advances being made in digitization. We talked about the ICR product, but there's also a lot of advances being made in handwriting methods. And so to the extent that you might have handwritten notes or handwritten things coming into the contact center looking for help, albeit maybe a minor portion of the intake, there are technologies out there that can help with that. So I think those are that's considering the front end. I think the next thing is, types of work. So let's carry it through a little bit. The types of work that are being done, and then lastly, the output. So again, in the call center, as I think has been done, I know it's been done over many years, where people in the call center, especially the call center, look at, well, what are the most frequent types of activities that are performed? Let's automate that. So in some call centers, it has to do with bots on the desktop that perform automations that go across different applications, bring back data to the operator, present it, or in some cases, based on a scripted question, can even present the response or respond back to the customer in a robotic sense. It's the next step of carrying that out to the cognitive sense so that those bots can be expanded when a question comes in that isn't previously answered or it's not the previous script. How do I go against the data and then create an answer to respond to that inquiry. So that to me is a clear, similar application to other areas of the business where those kinds of cognitive responses can be created. And then lastly, it's the response back and giving the options. So communicating, and you kind of see this now when you deal with call centers. You have multiple people or multiple bots could be handling more than one chat session, right? And so you see this. But how is that response provided? Is it back via text in the chat? Is it via email? Is it some kind of letter that's sent? Or is it I call you back? And this is another twist on exactly what it's a little twist on responsiveness, but you get this now where instead of having to make the caller or the person contacting the contact center wait, there's a robot that comes on and says, we'll call you back when we have the answer, and it'll be within X period of time. And that's also another twist on the same thing. And the callback could be, we'll call you back, we'll email you, we'll send you a message, we'll chat you, whatever the right solution is. So I would just say, just keep thinking about applications in those areas, and that's where you'll see, I think, a lot of progress in the contact center. Okay, Rochelle, back to you.
Thank you so much, and I'm sad to say that we are at the top of the hour and we are out of time. So I do want to appreciate everyone who sent in the questions. I'll work with Mark then, and we'll work for those of you whose questions we didn't get to answer to provide the information back to you. But special thanks to everyone who took the time to listen in today and to engage and participate. Also want to thank everyone who's listening to the on-demand version. We do appreciate that you've joined us, and do let us know if you have any questions. And Mark, thanks so much for your pearls of wisdom. I mean, one thing that we truly benefit is not only from you engaging with clients all around the world, but from you extrapolating from those case studies and those actual hands-on experiences, and then bringing that into this kind of framework and sort of guide to help us with all of that, and certainly the words of wisdom at the very end to help us along the journey. So we are glad to be along the journey with you. So thanks, Mark, for your time. Thanks to those of you who've listened live and on the on-demand version. And with this concludes today's webinar.